So good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you today. My name is Udo Gattenlöhner from Germany, representing Global Nature Fund. I skipped that. When we accepted the invitation to this session by Zoltán and his team and the Great Lakes and Wetlands Association here in Hungary, I had kind of three expectations. The first one was to learn from you, to get information and inspiration. And yesterday and today, I have been able to listen to excellent presentations. So I have a lot of things to take home and a lot of new contacts. So alone, this was worthwhile to come here. Secondly, I would like to take the opportunity to very briefly introduce you to what Global Nature Fund and Living Lakes are doing, what we have been doing over the last 25 years in order to contribute a little bit to the protection of lakes and wetlands. Having heard all the figures of the last days, it's a little bit like a competition who of the EU 27 is worst in class. We heard that in Hungary we have destroyed, or you have destroyed, or we all 84% of your wetlands. We just heard that in Finland 5 million hectares have been drained of the peatland for forestry. Usually it's Germany who being the worst in class, so we have drained 95% of all the peatlands. You see, Germany is always worse. So, but yeah, not kidding too much. It's a serious issue that there is no real appreciation for wetlands, peatlands, lakes, and their value and their important contribution, as we have heard, to carbon sequestration. So we have been doing a number of projects, primarily on a global scale in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, but a few also in Europe. We just finished one together with Legambiente on microplastic contamination of Italian and German lakes. We have done a project with colleagues in funded by LIFE, another LIFE project with colleagues in Spain and in Greece on the role or the function of constructed wetlands to protect or buffer wetlands in view on eutrophication, and some other activities primarily funded by the Commission on renewable agriculture, for instance, in lake regions. And we just got a new project approved on biodiversity and the food sector, also through LIFE. And we're involved, and I'm curious to hear more from Paul about the Horizon Euro Lakes project that Wetlands International is coordinating, and there is but I'm only scratching on the surface, and because it's afternoon, that part of Living Lakes, I thought it's better, instead of speaking too much, to show you a little video. It's just 2.5 minutes to introduce you a little bit also to the beauty of lakes and wetlands globally. And the title is a little bit misleading. I will introduce you very briefly to the European Living Lakes Association. I continue with that. The title should have a question mark, because the European Living Lakes Association is a very new entity. So we don't have a track record. We don't have recipes how to protect wetlands and how to increase the resilience. We're just trying to kind of create, not necessarily an umbrella organization, but an entity that is able also to tap into certain funding schemes, because what we have been, what we have been experiencing in the framework of Living Lakes, which is a kind of an informal lake organizations network, primarily civil society organizations, is that we don't have the legal legitimacy to apply for funding. And this was one of the main reasons why we have applied for an EU grant, and we got it. And we used that grant to constitute the European Living Lakes Association with a number of civil society organizations, you will see that later, from Europe. And we, as a first activity, we did kind of a little scientific survey. We didn't do it ourselves. We just collected information, up-to-date information and scientific research on the impact of climate change on lakes and wetlands. So I will be speaking about that. Very briefly, as an introduction, Global Nature Fund, we're not a fund. That is also misleading. We're a foundation. We're a relatively small charity based in Germany at Lake Constance. This is where I live and where our team is working. We're a small team of 26 people staff. And we have 3 offices in Germany. So our mission, it's very straightforward. It's to protect ecosystems or to contribute to the protection of ecosystems. What we're doing is working in very close collaboration with communities, riparian communities in lake regions, in developing countries. As I said, this is our main focus, but also in the last years more on the food sector and the impact of the food sector and agriculture on the biodiversity in Europe, and involving also the youth into that. So, as I said, we are a civil society organization. As Stoltan said, we're also not necessarily always a friend of the government. Our German partner organization, Environmental Action Germany, is not only suing Mercedes and BMW and Coca-Cola and McDonald's, but also the German government, because they don't comply with their own rules and standards. On the other hand, in the international cooperation, we also rely on subsidies and grants from the government for our projects. It's a little bit a delicate, ambivalent constellation we are in, being opposing to a certain extent the government and their strategies, and on the other hand, trying to also use the financial resources from the government, in particular for international cooperation. But we consider, or we are civil society, we're a charity, so we have a charity status, so we can collect donations. So we're doing that from individuals, but also from companies to a certain extent. But our primary source of income for the projects are grants and subsidies from the German government, from the Commission. So we're tapping more or less in all the different funding schemes, LIFE, Interreg, Erasmus, Horizon, so whatever, INTPA, whatever is available and suitable. Yes, it's obvious that human beings affect this planet. So we have heard a lot about that during the last 2 days, and you have seen a lot of figures, and I assume that you are familiar with this, the planetary boundaries by the Potsdam Institute for Climate Change Research. And the more we know, and the more information we have, the more it's obvious that what was called a polycrisis yesterday, it's biodiversity, it's climate, it's water. There are a lot of challenges, and we are constantly kind of destabilizing our planet. And we do not know exactly where the tipping points are. And what is interesting is that biodiversity and nutrients, for instance, are considered to be a larger threat than climate, which is more obvious in the public discussion. I assume that you know that. And if you have followed the research of the PIK, of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Change Research, you know that the deeper they have been digging into this knowledge, the obvious it got that we're exceeding more and more of these natural boundaries of our planet. This as a background. Another indicator, and you might also know that, is the Global Footprint Network is publishing this Earth Overshoot Day every year, and every year it's getting earlier and earlier. That means that in Europe, and most countries are the same, we need 2.5 planets if we continue with using the resources as we do and destroying the ecosystems and the habitats. And I think this is the main driver as we do. In Germany this year, it has been the 2nd May, so every year it's 2 or 3 days earlier. If you look at other countries, then who's worst in class here? It's, of course, Arab states and the United States, but all the European countries are very similar, and some countries that you would not necessarily expect, like even Indonesia from tiger states, their performance is still relatively good, not probably because they are more aware of that, but because the country is so big. Okay, looking again at water ecosystems, and the role of water ecosystems and the impact of water ecosystems. And you might also know that research from WWF, and very recently they published a new issue of the Living Planet report. The main impact is on freshwater ecosystems. So this is where we have a really dramatic loss of biodiversity and a large destabilization of the system. There are a lot of conventions that try to identify solutions. You know that Ramsar is the oldest convention from 1978. We're trying to work with these conventions. We just started a new project on the wetland cities. Maybe you're familiar with that idea of Ramsar. It's not too popular. Started in 2018. There are very few wetland cities here in Europe. Hungary and France have been the first countries to nominate or identify wetland cities. Our intention is to promote a little bit that idea of urban water ecosystems and their function within an urban context, as well as I don't go into detail concerning the other conventions. There are UNFCCCs right in the neighborhood of our office in Bonn. That sometimes is quite convenient that the UN is pretty close in Bonn. So looking a little bit at the activities of Global Nature Fund, and I said I'm only scratching on the surface. So this is the portfolio that we have, focusing on 4 different activity fields. What we have been doing very intensively is the rehabilitation of mangrove ecosystems, primarily in Asia, but also a little bit in Latin America. It's a different context, but sometimes I would say that the technologies in view on rehabilitation of wetlands, and in this case, at the say between terrestrial and marine ecosystems, it's a little bit different, but in this case, mangroves are similar. We have long experiences, as I mentioned earlier, with constructed wetlands, primarily in Latin America, but also a little bit in Europe. We have been doing that, as I said, in Spain, or with colleagues and organizations in Spain and some other countries. And of course, very often in developing countries, it's quite important to involve the fisheries communities. In Germany, we struggle a little bit because the fishermen, they want higher nutrient levels in Lake Constance, where I live. Of course, that is completely against the objectives and the WFD, and I don't expect that this will ever happen. We're down to 5 micrograms per liter of total phosphorus, which is good, but of course it has a negative effect, not necessarily negative, but it affects the biomass in the lake. And in particular, the cyprinids have been less than in the past. And another field of activity is on water, sanitary and hygiene. So the WASH portfolio, this I would say is not necessarily so relevant in Europe, but in developing countries, very often basic needs is very central. As I said, in view on the Living Lakes activities, which is a global network that we have launched in 1998 with 115 member organizations, only civil society organizations at the moment. I would like to share a little video with you, and then I continue very briefly with our experiences on the impact of climate change on water ecosystems. Thank you. It was a little bit an advertisement block, sorry for that, but it was meant to be like that, and to also advertise for the value of lakes and wetlands. And what you have seen are images and footage from different projects, from our partner organizations and from various events. So now about this impact of climate change on water ecosystems. It's a publication we did 2 years ago with support from, we started with support from the German government, and we have been focusing on Germany in the beginning. You know this from EEA, I skipped that a little bit. And you know that the status of water bodies in Germany is also not good, and Germany, like all the other 26, I expect, will fail to meet the objectives of the Water Framework Directive by 2027. We built up a little bit on a study we did more than 20 years ago in the framework of a Living Lakes conference, together with the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. There we used SRES scenarios from the IPCC in order to project the rise of temperature and the impacts on lakes by 2028. This was relatively far. As you can imagine, the impact is massive. We have been looking at the number of lakes from our network. In a nutshell, very briefly, now it's not surprising, but more than 20 years ago, it was quite interesting to see the impacts that you have. Of course, higher temperatures in winter and in summer, and the shift of precipitation of rainfall from summer to winter. So that means you will have warmer and wetter winters and warmer and drier summers. Not in all regions, but in a majority of the regions, including Lake Constance, for instance. And the expected rise in temperature, depending a little bit on the scenario, is between 3 and 6 degrees by 2080, which is dramatic, of course. And you might know that the temperature of the water bodies is increasing more quickly than the air temperature in all regions. So as I said, we have used that as a kind of a basis and collected updated information from different scientists, and the conclusions for years that are much closer to us, 2030 to 2050, are very similar, that we can expect, not surprisingly, higher air temperatures and higher water temperatures, and that the temperatures in summer will rise more than the mean temperature, so the summers will be even more warm than you would have expect on an average scale, and there is a precipitation change. So I rush a little bit through that because it's not completely surprising. So lakes are already warming. We have negative impacts on lakes, on the eutrophication level of lakes, and a further use of the lakes, for instance, for cooling, will contribute to that problem. I left those complex slides in as a reference because the organizers will provide that PowerPoint to you, so feel free also to use it, and you can download the publication. I will put a QR code here from our website for free, and you can use that information on impacts of biodiversity or environmental security, but it's very much in line with things that we have heard during the last days. I skipped that. Now, the recommendations from that study is very much in line with the statement from this conference, so it's more or less the same findings, that we have to reduce nutrient inputs to protect water ecosystems. We have to avoid further pollutants, endocrine disruptors, medicaments, hormones, microplastic, a reduction of CO2 and methane, and the importance of polludiculture, of wettening peatland is key, and a rehabilitation and a re-establishment of buffer zones is of highest importance, and minimization of neobiota or other invasive species. That is not surprising, and as I said, it's very much in line what the publication or what the document also tells. Now, some last words on ELA and our intention with the European Living Lakes Association. You can see a number of organizations from Hungary, from Poland, from Spain, and other countries that have constituted this European Living Lakes Association as a legal entity that can also tap into EU funding together with us. We're completely open for collaboration and also for feedback, positive but as well as critical, because we don't not really know whether, and by now we don't, as I said, have a track. We do not know whether this is an appropriate structure or it might be redundant to some other things that we already have. And we heard a lot about activities from Wetlands International, from PAN, or from the EEB and other actors on a European scale. So we would like with this new body to contribute to the protection of lakes and wetlands, in addition to what GNF or what Living Lakes is doing. And for the first time within that framework of Living Lakes, we have a legal entity. I think that is the big advantage. And then we can act as an applicant to certain funding from Germany, from the EU, and other potential donors. I rush a little bit through that. And as I said, we encourage you to get in touch with us and assist us or collaborate with us in view on the topics. I'm open to your feedback and discussions. Thank you very much.